On December 9, 2004, the fundamental laws of physics were completely shattered on a professional basketball court. According to official league video archives and game protocols, Tracy McGrady scored an impossible 13 points in exactly 35 seconds. He was the ultimate, terrifying superstar of the 2000s, a genius scorer who moved with such lethal grace it looked entirely unfair. Glossy sports magazines painted him as an unstoppable, multi-million-dollar force. But behind the deafening roar of the crowds and the flashy sneakers, a dark, terrifying medical reality was secretly brewing. How does a man capable of executing absolute, mind-bending miracles end up with a legacy permanently stained by a chilling, catastrophic number? In the official statistical reference books of the association, a devastating truth is permanently recorded. As the undisputed leader of his franchise, Tracy suffered exactly 8 agonizing defeats in the very first round of the playoffs. 8 times he carried the desperate, heavy hopes of an entire city, and 8 times his own body violently betrayed him before he could cross that initial finish line. Why does this dark, unforgiving statistic haunt the legacy of the greatest natural talent of his generation? Whispers in the sports media loudly claimed he simply lacked the mental toughness required of a true champion, while others circulated wild rumors of a dark locker room curse. But if we dig past the screaming headlines and closely examine the deeply buried journalist reports from that highly secretive era, a much more sinister picture emerges. His rapid, violent physical collapse was absolutely not a sudden, unpredictable tragedy. To truly understand how the magnificent body of a basketball god turned into fragile, shattered glass before he even reached his 30th birthday, we must forcibly pry open the heavily guarded, highly classified scouting reports all the way back from the year 1996. Long before the bright lights and the deafening success of the professional arenas, Tracy McGrady was just a kid in Florida with a baseball glove, dreaming of striking out batters. Basketball was barely on his radar, an afterthought for a boy who spent his afternoons throwing fastballs. But fate took a strange turn. According to the regional Florida newspapers published in the fall of 1993, a young Tracy was unceremoniously cut from his high school basketball team. He was told he simply was not good enough. And here is the main question. How does a teenager who gets rejected by a modest local school program suddenly become the most terrifying offensive weapon in the country? The answer was hidden in his own biology. In the school's anthropometric cards, a bizarre physical anomaly was documented. By the age of 15, Tracy McGrady had already stretched to a staggering 193 centimeters, armed with unnaturally long limbs and a vertical leap that defied gravity. Scouts quickly dismissed these traits as pure genetic luck, entirely missing the catastrophic toll these explosive jumps would eventually take on his developing spine. According to interviews with his early coaches, his body was growing faster than his muscles could support. This early rejection could have easily put an end to his athletic journey forever. Yet, in the summer of 1996, a massive financial deposit from a global sports giant mysteriously appeared in the young man's life, changing his trajectory permanently. The transformation of Tracy McGrady from a forgotten high school reject to a global phenomenon happened behind closed doors, far away from the casual fans. He transferred to the elite Mount Zion Christian Academy, but the real turning point occurred in a highly exclusive summer showcase. In the archived scouting reports of legendary basketball executive Sonny Vaccaro from July 1996, Tracy McGrady arrived at the legendary ABCD camp as an absolute nobody and left with the official ranking of the #1 high school player in the nation. He dismantled established stars, leaving scouts scrambling for their notebooks. But who was really pulling the strings behind this meteoric rise? It was not just college recruiters watching from the shadows. Corporate sharks were circling the waters. In the financial reports of major sports media outlets, it was noted that the Adidas Corporation orchestrated a relentless behind-the-scenes campaign to bypass the traditional college route entirely. They offered the teenager a staggering contract worth $12 million over 6 years. But why was such an unprecedented astronomical figure offered to a kid who had not played a single minute of professional basketball? Some sources asserted it was a desperate gamble to find the next generational icon, while others claimed it was a calculated scheme to monopolize the youth market. Holding a guaranteed check for $12 million, the 19-year-old made a shocking decision that sent the league's general managers into an absolute frenzy at the draft in June 1997. The professional basketball draft is always a high-stakes gamble, but selecting a high school teenager with absolutely no college experience was considered a scandalous, career-ending risk for any executive. According to the official league draft transcripts, on June 25, 1997, Tracy McGrady was selected with the 9th overall pick by the Toronto Raptors. And here a massive question arises. Why did 8 desperate teams completely pass on a generational talent who had already secured a $12 million shoe deal? In the confidential scouting report circulated that spring, it was heavily noted that front offices were terrified of his severe lack of muscle mass, deeply doubting his undeveloped frame could survive the brutal physical warfare against grown men. The pressure resting on the young Canadian franchise was absolutely suffocating. The executives sitting in the war room were sweating over their controversial choice. In an interview published in the Toronto Star newspaper later that year, the team's general manager, Isaiah Thomas, openly spoke about an unbelievable athletic potential that was dangerously bordering on a massive, franchise-altering risk. But why did they pull the trigger if they secretly knew his back and knees were a ticking time bomb? Some insiders claimed the front office was desperately searching for a flashy attraction to sell expensive tickets in a freezing hockey town, while other sources believed they genuinely saw the evolution of the sport in his unnatural leaps. The grand stage was finally set for a triumphant debut. However, within the very first month of training camp in Canada, a shocking reality hit the teenager, as leaked team memos revealed that the coaching staff had absolutely no intention of letting their brand-new millionaire step onto the court. Life in Canada quickly turned into an isolating nightmare for the young prodigy. Instead of dominating the hardwood to the roar of the crowds, he found himself glued to the far end of the bench, watching older, less talented veterans take his rightful spot. According to the official player statistics database, Tracy McGrady played a miserable 16.4 minutes on average during his rookie campaign. How does a player labeled as the undeniable future of the league end up playing garbage time minutes for a struggling team? In the journalists' reports from that bleak winter, it was noted that the teenager was battling severe isolation, sleeping up to 15 hours a day just to escape the freezing weather and his deep, overwhelming frustration. Just as Tracy was desperately trying to find his footing, the front office made a calculated move that completely shattered his fragile ego. In the historical registry of league drafts, it is permanently recorded that in June 1998, the franchise acquired his own older cousin, the explosive high flyer Vince Carter. The dynamic inside the locker room instantly shifted. Vince immediately absorbed all the flashing cameras, the lucrative endorsements, and the roaring crowds, leaving Tracy permanently cast as the quiet, secondary sidekick. Some sources claimed the coaching staff deliberately favored Vince's outgoing personality, while others asserted Tracy simply retreated further into his protective shell. He silently swallowed the bitter resentment of living in his cousin's shadow for years. But in February of the year 2000, a highly publicized event took place that finally forced Tracy to plot his dramatic escape from Toronto. The All-Star Weekend is usually a glorious celebration of pure talent, but for Tracy McGrady, it became the ultimate psychological breaking point. According to the official event protocols from February 12th, the year 2000, held in the city of Oakland, Tracy and his cousin Vince stepped onto the court to compete in what would become the most legendary aerial showcase in basketball history. Tracy executed phenomenal, gravity-defying maneuvers that would have easily secured the trophy in any other given year. But why did his spectacular, high-flying performance feel like a devastating personal defeat? In the official judges' scoring sheets from that electrifying night, a very telling statistic was recorded. Vince Carter received a perfect 50 points for his opening aerial assault, while Tracy McGrady was handed a frustrating 49 points in the very first round. Just one single point separated them on paper, yet the massive gap in public adoration was as wide as an ocean. In the media reports following the event, it was repeatedly noted that every single camera lens, every screaming fan, and every glowing newspaper headline was exclusively dedicated to his cousin. It was the absolute, crushing confirmation of his worst fears. As long as he wore that purple Canadian uniform, he would never be the true alpha of the pack. Some sports historians argued that this exact night fueled a bitter, unspoken family rivalry, while others believed it was the necessary catalyst for his dark evolution. As soon as that agonizing season officially concluded, Tracy secretly met with elite sports agents in closed boardrooms to discuss an astronomical financial figure that would soon shock the entire basketball world. The summer of the year 2000 was an absolute feeding frenzy of corporate greed, whispered promises, and secret boardroom meetings. Tracy McGrady was finally a highly coveted free agent, and the entire league was desperately holding its breath. Vicious rumors swirled through the press about a potential move to the Chicago Bulls, but the young star had his eyes firmly set on the warm climate of his home state of Florida. On August 3rd of the year 2000, the basketball landscape violently shifted forever. According to the official press releases circulated by the league office that afternoon, Tracy McGrady formally and publicly signed his allegiance to the Orlando Magic. But what truly drove him away from a rising, terrifyingly athletic Canadian dynasty alongside his own blood relative? Was it genuinely just a severe case of homesickness, or was it a dark, insatiable hunger for pure, unfiltered ego? In the banking documents and contractual ledgers leaked from the league's open financial sources, a staggering, mind-numbing figure of $93 million spread over 7 long years was officially recorded. In the financial reports and journalistic columns of that turbulent month, it was heavily noted that Toronto simply could not match the powerful allure of being the undisputed, solitary king of a sunny franchise. How does a man handle the sudden crushing weight of $93 million resting squarely on his young, unproven shoulders? The abandoned fans up in Toronto burned his jerseys in the freezing streets, screaming about the ultimate sporting betrayal. Meanwhile, the Orlando front office executives were practically popping expensive champagne, completely convinced they had just birthed an unstoppable multi-championship dynasty. However, their arrogant, triumphant celebration was cut brutally short when, in October of that very same year, the terrifying, highly classified medical documents of their second-prized superstar violently surfaced in the club's administrative offices. The grand master plan of the Orlando franchise was supposed to be terrifyingly simple, yet devastatingly effective. Pair the explosive, rising genius of Tracy McGrady with the established, highly polished brilliance of Grant Hill. They were universally projected to be the ultimate offensive duo, built to mercilessly rule the Eastern Conference for an entire decade. But a dark, heavy shadow immediately fell over the locker room before the ink on their massive checks had even dried. In the deeply guarded medical cards and the official club statistics of the 2000 to 2001 season, a catastrophic reality was permanently documented. Grant Hill played exactly 4 games that entire campaign, just 4 single games out of a grueling 82-game marathon. How could a professional franchise sink tens of millions of dollars into a legendary player whose ankle was essentially crumbling into useless dust? Did the highly paid medical staff completely fail their basic evaluations? Or did they deliberately hide the severe, career-threatening damage from the furious ownership group? According to insider investigations and rumors buzzing in the tense arena corridors, team executives were frantically trying to cover up their monumental medical oversight. This disastrous turn of events left Tracy McGrady completely isolated on the brutal battlefield. Every single night, opposing defenses threw their biggest, most violent enforcers at him. In his deeply personal autobiographical interviews recorded years later, Tracy bluntly confessed that he never signed up to carry the entire heavy burden of a failing franchise completely by himself. He was forced into a punishing regime, grinding out nearly 40 agonizing minutes every night. The sheer desperation of being abandoned by his co-star forced Tracy to unlock a terrifying level of offensive dominance. Yet this sudden burst of supernatural scoring in the spring of the year 2001 would ultimately ring the very first terrifying alarm bell of a career-long psychological curse. Desperation in professional sports often breeds unstoppable monsters, and left entirely to his own devices, Tracy McGrady evolved into an offensive, terrifying force that the rest of the league was absolutely not prepared to handle. With virtually no reliable teammates to pass the ball to, he took matters into his own hands and simply obliterated opposing defensive schemes with a cold, almost sleepy look in his eyes. According to the official statistical database maintained by the association, his offensive production experienced a violent, unprecedented explosion, leaping dramatically from 15.4 points per game to an astonishing 26.8 points in a single, solitary season. But what was the true, hidden, and deeply physical cost of carrying a mediocre roster on his fragile spine night after exhausting night? In the sports journalism reports covering the sweaty, tense locker room atmosphere of that era, it was heavily noted that the young superstar was spending an increasingly alarming amount of time lying flat on the trainer's table, quietly receiving intensive treatments away from the prying cameras. Despite the agonizing pain blooming in his lower back, he became the absolute, unquestioned idol of a brand new generation. Millions of teenagers were desperately spending their parents' hard-earned money on his signature, shiny sneakers. He was untouchable, smoothly flying through the humid Florida air and destroying the championship hopes of rival cities. In a highly publicized, glittering ceremony in April of the year 2001, Association press releases formally confirmed he was handed the Most Improved Player award. He was standing at the absolute, dizzying pinnacle of individual glory, bathing in the flashing lights of global superstardom. And yet, as he confidently marched his exhausted team into the grueling postseason against the Milwaukee Bucks, he was completely unaware that this upcoming series would officially ignite a dark, inescapable nightmare that would haunt his legacy forever. When a single player completely dominates the entire floor, the glittering lights of the arena can quickly transform into a burning, magnifying glass. Tracy McGrady was scoring with a terrifying elegance, yet a dark, highly critical narrative was slowly being woven behind the scenes by ruthless sports media. According to the deeply analyzed reports of sports analysts published that spring, Tracy was averaging a mind-boggling 33.8 points per game during the highly anticipated 2001 playoff campaign. But how exactly does a superstar drop such astronomical historical numbers while his own team violently collapses around him? In the official playoff tournament brackets of the league, a chilling, inescapable reality was permanently recorded. His Orlando squad suffered humiliating 1-3 series defeats against the Milwaukee Bucks in 2001, and then exactly the same disastrous 1-3 result against the Charlotte Hornets in 2002. In the investigative columns of the era, it was repeatedly noted that powerful executives and hostile reporters began aggressively whispering a toxic, career-destroying label: a selfish, ball-hogging player who simply could not elevate the miserable roster around him. Was it genuinely his fault that the front office surrounded him with aging, broken-down veterans and minimum contract fillers? Or was he truly playing only for his own personal statistics? Tracy was visibly exhausted, practically carrying the entire heavy franchise on his aching, fragile spine. The vicious pressure from the press was completely suffocating, clearly attempting to break his soaring spirit. Instead of crumbling under the massive weight of these relentless public accusations, the furious young superstar locked himself deep inside the gym. As the journalists ruthlessly tore his leadership qualities apart on national television, Tracy McGrady secretly plotted a violent statistical revenge for the upcoming 2003 season that would shatter historical records and completely silence his loudest critics. The professional basketball world had absolutely no idea what kind of monster they had just awakened. Fueled by the bitter, agonizing taste of consecutive early playoff exits, Tracy McGrady unleashed a season of pure, unadulterated offensive terror. The fans began fiercely debating whether he had actually surpassed the legendary Kobe Bryant as the ultimate, unstoppable attacking guard in the entire association. In the final, verified statistical protocols of the 2002 to 2003 regular season, it was formally documented that Tracy secured the highly coveted scoring title by averaging a terrifying 32.1 points per game. But what exactly pushed a human body to operate at such a frantic, exhausting, and completely unsustainable level, night after night? In the official game summaries of the association dating back to February 21st of the year 2003, a truly spectacular, almost violent offensive explosion was permanently recorded. He ruthlessly dropped 52 points directly on the heads of the Chicago Bulls in a single, breathless night. In the post-game locker room interviews, opposing defenders openly and honestly admitted they were completely helpless against his soaring jump shots and lightning-fast first step. The very same media that had just recently crucified his character was suddenly worshiping right at his expensive sneakers, hailing him as the unquestioned, magnificent king of the Eastern basketball landscape. He was riding an impossible, dizzying wave of pure adrenaline, feeling absolutely invincible as he marched his squad into the demanding spring postseason. It genuinely seemed like absolutely nobody could stand in his raging path, but in the tense, sweaty atmosphere of April, while holding a commanding 3-1 series lead, Tracy sat down in front of a live microphone and uttered a careless phrase that instantly and violently destroyed everything he had built. Supreme confidence is the absolute lifeblood of any professional athlete, but unchecked, blinding arrogance can quickly summon a catastrophic downfall. The Orlando franchise entered the grueling first round against the highly physical, bruising Detroit Pistons, and surprisingly took a dominating, suffocating 3-1 series lead. The heavily favored, aggressive Pistons looked completely demoralized on the floor. Tracy McGrady had just played a spectacular high-flying game, and the glittering second round finally seemed like an absolute, guaranteed reality. However, in the carefully preserved audio and video recordings from the highly charged press conference immediately following that fourth game, a fatal, incredibly arrogant quote was forever captured by the flashing cameras. Tracy leaned heavily into the hot microphone, flashed a wide smile, and publicly declared that it certainly feels good to finally get into the second round. Why on earth would a seasoned, heavily scrutinized superstar openly disrespect a vicious, defensively minded opponent before the final heavy nail was actually driven into the coffin? In the locker room reports compiled by veteran journalists, it was fiercely noted that the furious Detroit roster printed out that exact cocky quote and plastered it all over their private walls. That single careless sentence ignited a furious, completely unstoppable fire of revenge. In the official referee protocols and league box scores, a devastating, historic collapse was formally documented. Orlando suffered 3 consecutive, brutal defeats, culminating in a humiliating 93-108 blowout loss in the deciding, tense 7th game. Detroit completely shattered the fragile Orlando offense, violently exposing their absolute, terrifying reliance on one single, exhausted man. The psychological shockwave of blowing such a massive, supposedly insurmountable lead was completely paralyzing. The agonizing mental defeat was so incredibly severe that by the time the very next season rolled around, the shattered superstar's own physical body began violently shutting down right in the middle of the hardwood floor. The human spine is not designed to absorb the crushing impact of carrying an entire professional basketball franchise, and for Tracy McGrady, the physical toll finally reached a terrifying breaking point. Following the devastating psychological collapse in the playoffs, the 2003 to 2004 regular season quickly morphed into an absolute, agonizing nightmare for the Orlando organization. The fans sitting in the humid arena watched in pure horror as their supposedly invincible superstar began violently grabbing his lower back, constantly wincing in excruciating pain during routine offensive possessions. But was his body genuinely failing him? Or was his shattered spirit simply refusing to endure the toxic, losing environment any longer? In the official medical summaries and team injury reports circulated during that dark, miserable winter, a deeply concerning pattern was permanently recorded. Tracy McGrady was repeatedly sidelined with severe, debilitating back spasms. He was practically living on the cold trainer's table, desperately receiving heavy treatments just to tie his expensive sneakers. Meanwhile, the highly paid executives in the front office were allegedly demanding he push through the agony, strictly reminding him of his massive $93 million financial obligations. In the historical chronicles of the regular association championship, a humiliating, completely disastrous statistic was formally documented. The Orlando squad suffered a catastrophic, soul-crushing streak of exactly 19 consecutive defeats. 19 times they walked off the hardwood completely broken. In the locker room, reports filed by veteran journalists, it was heavily noted that the furious superstar openly clashed with the coaching staff, his frustration boiling over as the medical staff pumped him full of painkillers. The relationship between the tortured athlete and the desperate front office became incredibly toxic, completely beyond repair. Realizing that their prized possession was rapidly deteriorating right before their eyes, the ruthless club management secretly placed a heavy stack of papers on the boardroom table in the sweltering summer of 2004, officially triggering the most shocking, earth-shattering blockbuster trade of the entire decade. The ruthless business of professional sports rarely shows any mercy or loyalty, even to a reigning, magnificent scoring champion. The rumors of a massive franchise-altering divorce had been fiercely swirling for months, but the sheer magnitude of the final transaction completely stunned the entire basketball landscape. The front office in Florida had grown absolutely exhausted by the constant medical complaints and the sour, defeated attitude of their superstar. According to the official heavily stamped trade documents filed with the league office on June 29, the year 2004, Tracy McGrady was formally exiled to the scorching desert heat of the Houston Rockets. But why did the Texas franchise aggressively gamble their entire future on a player with a highly documented, crumbling spine? In the financial and sports reports published by the league that very same week, the staggering details of this monumental transaction were officially recorded. It was a massive, incredibly complex 7-player blockbuster trade that famously included shipping away Houston's own beloved franchise point guard, Steve Francis. The high-stakes gamble was terrifyingly ambitious. The brilliant executives in Houston wanted to artificially engineer the ultimate, unstoppable, inside-out combination by pairing the explosive Tracy with the towering, highly skilled Chinese phenomenon, Yao Ming. The association was instantly buzzing with wild, uncontrollable excitement over the birth of this terrifying new dynasty. In the investigative pieces covering the massive merger, it was heavily noted that this trade also unlocked an unimaginable financial goldmine, instantly exposing Tracy to millions of rabid, incredibly loyal fans across the booming Asian market. The crushing weight of these global multi-million-dollar expectations was incredibly heavy, and the initial bumpy adaptation process on the Texas hardwood looked severely disjointed. However, on a seemingly ordinary quiet winter evening, exactly on December 9th of that very same year, the exhausted superstar would suddenly silence every single critic by executing an absolute, breathtaking miracle that top scientists and sports analysts are still desperately trying to decode frame by frame. There are fleeting, magical moments in professional sports where a mortal athlete temporarily taps into a terrifying, supernatural frequency, completely rewriting the established laws of physics and human endurance. The Houston squad was facing off against the bruising, defensively dominant San Antonio Spurs, a legendary organization specifically built to mercilessly choke the life out of opposing scorers. As the final desperate seconds ticked away on the arena clock, the hometown fans were already silently pouring out of the exits, fully accepting a bitter, guaranteed defeat. The Spurs held a massive, supposedly insurmountable 8-point lead. But what exactly triggers a battered, exhausted human mind to suddenly reject reality and orchestrate the most violent, statistically impossible comeback in the history of the modern hardwood? In the official, deeply analyzed video archives and broadcast tapes from that exact night, December 9th, 2004, an absolute anomaly of human performance was permanently captured. Tracy McGrady simply refused to surrender. In the official certified play-by-play game protocol verified by the league scorekeepers, the breathtaking violent sequence was formally documented. Tracy miraculously drained exactly 4 contested 3-point shots, including a wildly off-balance 4-point play, accumulating a staggering, impossible 13 points in precisely 35 seconds. He was pulling up from terrifying distances, completely ignoring the desperate, frantic arms of the league's most terrifying defenders. In the post-game media reports, it was repeatedly noted that the San Antonio coaching staff looked completely paralyzed, staring blankly at the scoreboard as if they had just witnessed a genuine glitch in the Matrix. He had single-handedly destroyed a championship-caliber defense in less time than it takes to tie a pair of sneakers. The delirious fans genuinely believed that with this terrifying level of individual brilliance, a shiny championship ring was an absolute, guaranteed certainty. However, their soaring championship dreams would violently crash back to earth in the tense spring of 2005 when highly controversial men with whistles and hidden agendas abruptly intervened. The spring of 2005 was supposed to be the glorious coronation of the Houston franchise. But instead, it devolved into one of the most highly suspicious, controversial postseason collapses in modern basketball history. The explosive Texas squad stormed into Dallas and aggressively seized a commanding 2-0 series lead right on their bitter rivals' home floor. Tracy McGrady was absolutely dismantling the opposing defense, and a ticket to the second round finally seemed secure. But how does a completely dominant, highly motivated team suddenly lose all its momentum in the blink of an eye? According to the official disciplinary rulings published by the league office that very week, a highly aggressive, loud complaint was formally lodged by the furious Dallas ownership. In those league documents, a massive financial penalty was permanently recorded. The eccentric billionaire owner of the Dallas franchise was slapped with a staggering $100,000 fine for publicly and viciously criticizing the referees. Why did the officiating crew suddenly swallow their whistles and dramatically change the entire physical flow of the series immediately after this massive financial penalty was announced? In the investigative columns and sports media reports of that tense month, it was heavily noted that the referees aggressively targeted the massive screens set by the Chinese giant Yao Ming, completely disrupting the Houston offensive rhythm. Some insiders claimed it was a deliberate, calculated league intervention to extend the highly profitable series, while others argued Dallas simply adjusted their physical tactics. The final result, however, was absolutely devastating. In the official referee protocols of the deciding matchup, a humiliating disaster was formally documented. Houston suffered a crushing 40-point blowout, losing the seventh game with a humiliating score of 76-116. This massive, suspicious defeat completely broke the rising Texas spirit, but an even darker hidden medical catastrophe involving their two franchise cornerstones was secretly brewing in the club's private training facilities. When a professional organization heavily invests hundreds of millions of dollars into two generational talents, the absolute minimum expectation is that they actually share the hardwood at the same time. The Houston front office had aggressively promised their rabid, global fan base an unstoppable, multi-championship dynasty. But the bitter reality hidden behind closed doors resembled a tragic, heavily medicated hospital ward. In the summarized playing timetables meticulously maintained by the association from the year 2005 through 2008, a truly shocking, catastrophic statistical pattern was formally documented. The two highest-paid superstars of the franchise missed dozens upon dozens of crucial regular season games, alternating their devastating physical breakdowns like a cursed, predictable pendulum. Just as Tracy McGrady's fragile lower back violently spasmed, the towering Chinese center would inevitably shatter a bone in his massive foot. How does a highly paid medical staff completely fail to keep their two most valuable, expensive assets standing upright for a single, full campaign? According to the insider investigations conducted by major sports media networks during those dark years, the locker room atmosphere was incredibly tense and filled with silent resentment. In those explosive journalistic reports, deeply concerning medical details were publicly revealed. Tracy was allegedly receiving heavy, regular injections of powerful painkillers just to endure the grueling, brutal practices mandated by his demanding, defensive-minded head coach. Some sources whispered about a toxic, escalating conflict over these unbearable physical workloads, asserting that the coaching staff was ruthlessly grinding their stars into dust. The superstar duo was desperately clinging to their fading championship hopes while heavily relying on medical crutches. Despite the agonizing, constant pain shooting through his shattered joints, Tracy confidently marched to the microphones in the spring of 2007 and made a bold, deeply emotional promise to finally conquer the first round, a vow that would ultimately lead to the most agonizing, heart-wrenching public breakdown of his entire professional life. A broken promise in professional sports is a heavy, suffocating burden, especially when an athlete has sacrificed his own physical well-being to honor it. The fiercely competitive playoffs of 2007 presented the absolute perfect opportunity for redemption. The Houston squad finally secured the highly coveted home court advantage against the rugged, physical Utah Jazz. Tracy McGrady was playing through excruciating, blinding agony, his knees and lower back practically held together by sheer willpower and heavy medical tape. The grueling, brutal series stretched to the absolute limit, forcing a dramatic winner-take-all showdown. But why does a legendary scorer, possessing every single offensive weapon imaginable, constantly find himself on the losing end of history? In the official verified playoff protocols of the association, the heartbreaking final outcome was permanently recorded. On May 5, 2007, Houston suffered another agonizing, suffocating defeat in the deciding seventh game, right in front of their stunned, silent home crowd. The psychological toll of this repeated failure was absolutely catastrophic. According to the official press conference transcripts and the heavily circulated broadcast video from that gloomy evening, a deeply raw, unfiltered moment of human vulnerability was permanently captured by the flashing cameras. A completely exhausted, physically destroyed Tracy sat heavily at the podium, lowered his head, and through bitter, uncontrollable tears, whispered a tragic, haunting quote. "I tried, man, I tried." He wept openly, completely surrendering to the crushing, overwhelming weight of the media's relentless mockery and his own failing body. The sports pundits and ruthless critics completely tore into the crying superstar, labeling him a fragile, broken leader who simply lacked the heart of a true champion. However, instead of quietly retreating into the shadows, the heavily criticized legend stubbornly decided to launch a completely reckless historic campaign the very next season, igniting an impossible 22-game winning streak that would officially and permanently destroy his remaining knee cartilage. The absolute defining characteristic of a true tragic hero is a stubborn, reckless refusal to accept their own mortal limits, even when the entire world is screaming at them to stop. The 2007 to 2008 season presented the most brutal, agonizing physical challenge of Tracy McGrady's entire professional existence. The massive Chinese center, Yao Ming, suffered yet another catastrophic season-ending breakdown, leaving the heavily scrutinized Texas franchise completely vulnerable and desperately searching for a savior. In the historical reference books of the league, an absolutely phenomenal superhuman statistic was formally documented. Tracy McGrady violently dragged his broken, exhausted teammates to exactly 22 consecutive victories. It was a terrifying, deeply mesmerizing display of pure, unadulterated offensive brilliance. But how exactly does a superstar, practically playing on one functioning leg, orchestrate the second-longest winning streak in the history of the modern association? In the heavily redacted medical files presented to the front office during that miraculous run, it was severely noted that team physicians were frantically begging the exhausted superstar to immediately shut down his grueling campaign, warning him that his knee cartilage was practically disintegrating into dust with every single jump. According to the words of the legendary player himself, spoken in deeply reflective interviews years later, he stubbornly refused to abandon his desperate brothers on the hardwood, fully choosing to sacrifice his own long-term health for the fleeting glory of the streak. The devastating, inevitable consequence of this heroic arrogance was terrifyingly severe. According to the highly guarded medical releases of the Houston franchise, published in February 2009, a terrifying, career-ending procedure was officially announced: a complex microfracture surgery on his shattered left knee. The brilliant, high-flying phenomenon that the world once worshipped was permanently erased on that sterile operating table. As soon as the incredibly detailed, highly pessimistic surgical reports landed on the heavy mahogany desks of the club executives, the cold, calculating Houston management violently threw their injured, bleeding legend right onto the chaotic, unforgiving auction block. The professional basketball machine is incredibly ruthless, rapidly chewing up fragile superstars and violently spitting them out the very moment their expensive, highly insured bodies finally fail. For a man who had completely dominated the terrifying, high-stakes arenas of the entire league for over a decade, the sudden, violent plunge into utter irrelevance was an incredibly bitter, highly humiliating pill to swallow. According to the official transaction registry maintained by the league office, on February 18, 2010, a massive, incredibly complex three-team trade was formally executed, suddenly banishing Tracy from Texas to the chaotic, highly dysfunctional environment of the New York Knicks. But why would a desperate, rebuilding franchise gamble on a completely broken, aging scorer who could barely elevate off the polished hardwood? In the investigative reports detailing the dark, cutthroat business mechanics of the association, it was fiercely noted that the Knicks were absolutely not interested in his fading basketball talents. They were simply using his massive, expiring contract as a convenient, disposable financial tool to magically erase their own crippling salary debts. The spectacular, high-flying idol of millions was violently reduced to a mere mathematical equation on a corporate spreadsheet. The sheer indignity of his rapid decline was absolutely staggering. In the league's open financial ledgers, a deeply humiliating, shocking sum was permanently recorded. Just months later, he was forced to sign a depressing, severely discounted, veteran minimum contract with the Detroit Pistons for approximately $1.3 million. He plummeted from earning upwards of $20 million a season to desperately begging for a few spare minutes at the very end of the lonely bench. He bounced around the league like a discarded relic, desperately enduring humiliating, closed-door tryouts, just to prove he could still run up and down the court. Realizing that absolutely no one in the hostile American market believed in his ruined, broken body anymore, Tracy desperately packed his heavy bags and boarded a long flight to a foreign land where he was still passionately worshipped as a living, breathing god. Exile in a foreign, completely unfamiliar league is usually the final, highly depressing chapter for a fading American sports star. But for Tracy McGrady, stepping off that long flight into the humid Asian air felt like a massive, glorious, and completely unexpected resurrection. He was greeted by thousands of screaming, delirious fans, desperately weeping at the airport, treating him with the absolute, unquestioned reverence of a conquering emperor. In the official certified statistics provided by the Chinese Basketball Association, a dominant, highly impressive figure was permanently documented. He comfortably averaged exactly 25 points per game for the Qingdao Eagles, putting on spectacular, nostalgic shows for the sold-out, roaring crowds. But how does a player living like an absolute rock star in a foreign country suddenly find himself sitting on the biggest, most terrifying stage of the American Finals just a few months later? In the official press releases issued directly by the legendary San Antonio Spurs organization on April 16, 2013, a completely shocking, desperate late-season contract was formally signed right before the vicious playoff wars began. The brilliant, highly calculating coaching staff in Texas needed a smart, veteran presence to quietly sit at the end of their deeply experienced bench. It was the ultimate ironic twist of his entire dramatic destiny. The player famously cursed to never survive the very first round was suddenly marching directly into the glorious, blood-soaked championship finals against the terrifying Miami Heat. He played practically 0 minutes, but in the legendary agonizing 6th game of that series, Tracy was sitting exactly a few feet away from the polished hardwood, literally mere seconds away from finally slipping that heavy, golden championship ring onto his trembling finger. However, a miraculous, heartbreaking 3-point shot by the opposing team completely shattered the Spurs' celebration. That single, agonizing, heavily documented moment violently ripped the shiny championship completely out of his exhausted hands, leaving Tracy with absolutely no other choice but to permanently hang up his worn sneakers and finally face the harsh, unforgiving court of basketball history. The ultimate agonizing climax of any legendary sporting career is the exact moment an athlete finally looks directly into the blinding lights of the television cameras and quietly admits that their violently exhausted body has absolutely nothing left to give. The fierce, deeply divided court of public opinion was immediately thrust into a chaotic, highly emotional debate regarding his complicated, incredibly tragic legacy. According to the heavily publicized broadcast transcripts and official video archives of the ESPN First Take television program, a deeply sobering final statement was formally recorded on August 26, 2013. Tracy McGrady officially and permanently announced his complete retirement from the professional hardwood. But how does the incredibly unforgiving, ruthlessly statistics-obsessed basketball world judge a transcendent, high-flying phenomenon who never technically won a single championship ring or even led his own franchise past the brutal first round of the playoffs during his absolute physical prime? In the vicious, highly critical editorial columns and aggressive sports radio debates of that exact week, it was heavily noted that angry traditional purists aggressively demanded he be entirely excluded from the sacred immortal halls of greatness, coldly labeling his terrifying offensive records as completely empty, meaningless statistics. They pointed directly at the haunting, undeniable zeros in his postseason resume as the ultimate damning proof of a broken, deeply cursed leader. However, the highest, most secretive governing body of the sport fundamentally disagreed with this incredibly harsh, cruel public narrative. In the official press releases and historical archives of the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame, a glorious final vindication was permanently documented. In the year 2017, Tracy was formally inducted into the ultimate pantheon of basketball immortality. He was not a fragile failure, nor was he the tragic victim of some dark, mystical locker room curse. The undeniable truth, deeply hidden within his extensive, heartbreaking medical files, is far more profoundly human. Tracy McGrady simply possessed a divine, terrifying athletic genius that his own mortal, incredibly fragile spine could never truly support, ultimately sacrificing every single ounce of his physical health just to give the world a fleeting, magnificent glimpse of absolute, pure perfection.